The wind in the Wyoming Territory didn't just blow, it sang a low, mournful dirge through the jagged teeth of the Medicine Bow Mountains, carrying the scent of parched sagebrush and the iron tang of coming rain. To most, it was a warning to find shelter, but to Clara Thorne, it was the sound of freedom, a wild and lonely music that matched the rhythm of her own heart. She stood on the weathered porch of the painted sky waystation, her hands tucked into the pockets of her canvas apron, watching the horizon bleed into shades of bruised purple and burnt orange. Clara was a woman built of grit and soft silk, a schoolteacher who had traded the stifling parlors of Philadelphia for the raw, unfiltered honesty of the frontier. She was the anchor of this small settlement, a woman who could quote Byron while stitching a gunshot wound, yet as she watched the silhouettes of the scrub oak dance in the twilight, she felt a familiar hollow ache, a longing for something she couldn't name, a storm that hadn't yet broken over the plains. The silence of the evening was shattered by the rhythmic, heavy thud of a horse pushed to the brink of exhaustion. Clara's posture shifted, her spine straightening as she reached for the Winchester rifle leaned against the doorframe, a habit born of necessity in a land where the law was often a week's ride away. Out of the swirling dust of the trail emerged a shadow, a tall, broad-shouldered man slumped low in a saddle of worn Spanish leather. His horse, a powerful black stallion flecked with white foam and crimson spray, stumbled as it reached the hitching post. The man didn't dismount so much as he fell, his spurs jingling with a lonely metallic clatter against the hard-packed earth. Clara didn't hesitate. She dropped the rifle and ran, her heavy skirts kicking up dust. As she reached him, the man rolled onto his back, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Even through the mask of trail grime and blood, his face was striking, all sharp angles and shadows, with eyes the color of a stormy sea that seemed to look right through her. "Easy now," Clara whispered, her voice a soothing balm against the harshness of the night. "You're at the waystation. You're safe." The man's hand, calloused and stained, shot out to grip her wrist with surprising strength. Don't let them see the horse," he wheezed, his voice like grinding gravel. "The stars, they're watching." Clara looked down at him, seeing the dark bloom of a wound just beneath his ribs. This was Silas Vane. She didn't need a wanted poster to know the name. The whispers had been circulating through the territory for months. The ghost of the Gulch, a man accused of a train robbery he claimed never happened, a man with a price on his head and a hole in his soul. But as she looked into those desperate, searching eyes, she didn't see a criminal. She saw a man who had been running for so long he had forgotten how to stand still. For the next 3 days, the world narrowed down to the confines of a small back room, filled with the smell of liniment, lavender, and the metallic tang of blood. Clara tended to Silas with a clinical precision that masked a rising tide of emotion. She washed the grit from his skin, discovering scars that told a story of a life lived on the jagged edge of survival. When the fever took him, he muttered names, Sarah, Benjamin, a ranch called Silver Creek, and he wept with a quiet, devastating intensity that broke something inside Clara. She stayed by his side, pressing cool cloths to his forehead and humming old hymns, her heart hammering against her ribs whenever his hand would find hers in the dark, seeking an anchor in the storm of his delirium. The town of Painted Sky was a fragile thing, a collection of timber buildings clinging to the earth like barnacles. It was a place of secrets, where the barkeep, Elias, watered down the whiskey, and the blacksmith, Miller, knew exactly whose horse had thrown a shoe near the bank the night of the heist. Tension simmered beneath the surface like a peat fire. When Silas finally awoke, the air in the room felt electric, heavy with the unsaid. He watched her move about the room, his gaze following the way the sunlight caught the stray copper strands of her hair. "Why'd you do it?" he asked one afternoon, his voice stronger now, though still etched with pain. "You know who I am. You know what they say I did." Clara paused, a bowl of broth in her hands. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the weariness in the set of his jaw. I see a man who bled for 3 days without complaining. I see a man who cries for his mother in his sleep. Out here, Silas, the truth isn't what's written on a poster, it's what a person does when they think no one is looking. Silas let out a short, bitter laugh. I'm a dead man walking, Clara. The law is coming, and if they don't find me, the men who actually robbed that train will. I'm a loose thread they need to snip. Then we'll be careful, she said, her voice firm, but I won't turn a wounded soul away from my door. The days that followed were a delicate dance of growing intimacy and shared fear. Silas began to help around the station as his strength returned, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he mended a broken fence or helped the local children with their lessons. The children loved him. They saw him not as an outlaw, but as a giant who knew how to track a deer and could whistle like a meadowlark. Clara watched him with the children, a lump forming in her throat. She saw the man he could have been, the life he had been robbed of by a twist of fate and a corrupt deputy. One evening, as the moon hung like a silver coin over the prairie, they sat together on the porch. The only sound was the distant lowing of cattle and the soft creak of the rocking chair. Silas reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact was like a spark to dry tinder. He pulled back, his face clouded. I can't stay, he whispered. Every minute I'm here, I put a target on your back. Clara turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. And every minute you're gone, I'll be wondering if the wind is carrying your last breath. Don't go because of me, Silas. Go because you have to, but don't you dare say it's for my sake. Clara, he moved closer, the scent of tobacco and pine needles clinging to him. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. He kissed her then, a slow, desperate collision of 2 lonely souls. It tasted of salt and longing, a promise whispered into the vast, indifferent night. In that moment, the danger felt miles away, buried under the weight of their shared heartbeat. But the frontier is a cruel mistress, and she rarely allows such peace to last. The following morning, the sound of galloping hooves echoed through the valley, not 1 horse, but a dozen. Clara's heart sank as she saw the glint of tin stars in the sun. It was Deputy Miller and a posse of hired guns, men with cold eyes and itchy trigger fingers. Silas was in the barn, saddling his stallion. He heard them coming and knew the time for hiding was over. Clara ran to the porch, her heart racing. They're here, Silas. Get to the back trail. But Silas didn't run. He stepped out of the barn, his revolvers holstered low, his face a mask of grim determination. He looked at Clara, a world of regret and love in his eyes. I'm tired of running, Clara. If I go now, they'll just burn this place down to find me. I won't have your blood on my hands. Silas, no, she cried, but he was already walking towards the center of the dusty street. The confrontation was a slow-motion nightmare. The deputy leveled his rifle, his voice booming across the square. Silas Vane, stand down or we'll fill you with more lead than a Nevada mine. The townspeople huddled in doorways, their faces pale. Clara stood on the porch, her hand gripping the railing so hard her knuckles turned white. She saw the movement in the shadows, the real outlaws, the men Silas had warned her about, positioned on the rooftops. They weren't there to arrest him, they were there to ensure he never spoke. He didn't do it, Clara screamed, her voice breaking the heavy silence. The gold is in the blacksmith's cellar. Check the floorboards. The distraction worked for a heartbeat. The deputy glanced toward the blacksmith shop, and in that second the snipers on the roof opened fire. The air exploded with the sharp crack of Winchesters. Silas dived for cover behind a water trough, his own guns barking in return. The street turned into a chaotic swirl of gun smoke and screaming horses. Clara didn't think. She grabbed her own rifle from the porch and took aim at the muzzle flashes on the roof. She was a schoolteacher, yes, but she was a frontier woman first. The battle was short and brutal. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the outlaws lay dead on the shingles, and Deputy Miller stood over Silas, his rifle shaking. But Silas wasn't reaching for his gun. He was holding a ledger, a small leather-bound book he'd snatched from the coat of one of the fallen men. "Check the dates, Miller," Silas gasped, blood seeping from a fresh graze on his arm. "Names, dates, and every cent of that gold. Your own men sold you out." The deputy took the book, his face paling as he flipped through the pages. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of truth. The townspeople began to emerge, their murmurs growing into a roar of indignation. The real thieves had been caught, and the ghost of the Gulch stood vindicated, though battered and broken. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows over the town, Silas sat on the edge of the trough, Clara kneeling beside him, tending to his arm. The deputy had gone to make the arrests, leaving a tentative peace in his wake.
"You saved me," Silas said, his voice a mere whisper, "in more ways than one." Clara leaned her forehead against his. "We saved each other, Silas. That's what people do when they have something worth fighting for." He looked out toward the mountains, the peaks glowing like embers. "I still have to go, Clara. I have to clear my name in the capital. I have to make sure this is truly over." "I know," she said, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "But the trail always leads back to the waystation. I'll be here, Silas. I'll be keeping the lamp lit." He pulled her close, the warmth of her body a promise against the cold night ahead. He didn't say goodbye. Out here, goodbye felt too final. Instead, he whispered a vow into her hair, a promise of a future where they wouldn't have to hide, where the only thing they'd be running toward was each other. As he mounted his horse and turned toward the darkening horizon, the sound of his departure was no longer a frantic escape, but a steady, purposeful rhythm. Clara watched until he was nothing more than a speck against the vastness of the prairie, the wind carrying the scent of sage and the hope of a new dawn. The frontier was still wild, and the road ahead was long, but for the first time in her life, Clara Thorne knew exactly where she was going.